Tiers are absolutely everything in rookie drafts this year. If you're sitting in a certain range of the draft, you better be doing everything that you can just to trade up 2 picks. And if you can't trade up 2 picks, you might as well trade down 4 picks and pick up some extra value. I'm going to be talking about those different ranges in drafts. I'm going to be talking about 1 quarterback and super flex ranks, but let's start with the super flex ones. Leading off with Ashton Jeanty, tier 1, nothing's changed all offseason. He was up there with Bijan and Gibbs in my rankings at the very beginning of the offseason. Some people yelled at me over it, but I don't care. I'm going to keep him right there. You can make an argument he is the dynasty running back 1 right now. The hit rates for these elite prospects at the running back position are sky high. You go back since 2016, the running backs drafted inside the top 10 picks of the NFL draft are Barkley, Bijan, CMC, Zeke, and Leonard Fournette. The only better running back prospects we've seen with the FSC prospect model since 2016 were Barkley and Bijan, and I would make an argument that Jeanty is possibly a better prospect than Bijan was. Now, obviously, everybody has heard over and over and over again the broken tackle numbers and exactly how good he is after contact. I don't need to tell you that. But what I need to remind everybody is you go back to 2023, this is a running back that had 569 receiving yards and led all of college football in receiving. So I think he can see 3+ touches with the Raiders immediately. He should be a round 1 redraft pick this year. And I think you make an argument he is the #1 running back overall in Dynasty. Now, going over to tier 2, this is where we're going to have some conversations. This is where we're going to have some arguments. If somebody wanted to scream at me, oh my gosh, Mason Travis Hunter has to be the 102 for this reason. Oh my gosh, Mason, go look at where McMillan scores in the prospect page. He has to be the #2 for this reason. Y'all want to yell at me over it? You can do you. This is a tier of picks 2 through 4. I'm going to have Hampton at pick 2. And the reason for that is, in my mind, there are 0 red flags with Amari and Hampton whatsoever. This is a running back that checks every single box. He has the size to be a 3-down player. You've actually seen him have that 3-down workload where he had 281 rush attempts through only 12 games this past season at North Carolina. Not only did he have the 281 rush attempts, he had 38 receptions as well. So through 12 games, the dude had over 300 touches. If you actually look at what he was able to do as a receiver, he was second in his offense in receptions with 38. Insane. If you go ahead and if you look at his athletic testing numbers, combine this with the fact that he was a round 1 pick and over 25% of his touches led to first downs, which you can see all of this over there on the prospect page on the site. The only other running backs that were able to have those same numbers since 2016 have been Saquon Barkley, Bijan, Jeanty, CMC, Zeke, Fournette, Hampton, Etienne, Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, yes, Travis Etienne busted out of this list. He was the only guy. But outside of that, every single one of these running backs turns into an RB1 in fantasy. He goes to an offense that has really determined they are going to be running the ball at will. Well, yes, you have Najee Harris there early on. Najee Harris is in a 1-year contract, and in 2026 and beyond, we should expect that Hampton is presumably getting drafted as a top 5 running back in fantasy every single year. If you combine the size with the receiving skill set, with the coaching staff, with the investments this team's made into the offensive line, with the athletic profile, absolutely nothing when it comes to the red flags. Now, maybe you're not super excited to start in week 1 because Najee Harris is there. But again, this could be a Bucky Irving, Rachaad White type scenario where, trust me, go look at my startup rankings on the site. I already have Hampton ranked ahead of Bucky in Dynasty. But maybe, yes, Najee does have some work at the very beginning of the season. But as the year goes on, Hampton's just going to take more and more and more. So, looking at Travis Hunter, this is where things are going to be super interesting. And I have no idea in your league, if you're playing in a league where maybe people don't really watch YouTube videos, right? They don't do their research. I have no idea where Travis Hunter is going to go. Like, I actually just dropped this on the site, which I'm super excited to get actual updated ADP when it comes to these rookie drafts for Travis Hunter. And what we just launched on the website, I think is going to help us out with that a ton. And this is completely free over there on the website for y'all. You can hit the mock drafts tab, and there will always be public mock draft lobbies available for you to get into a Dynasty startup draft. Whether you want to get into a Dynasty Superflex, whether you want to get into a Dynasty 1 quarterback, or if you want to go hop in a Dynasty live rookie mock draft as well. All you have to do is go over to flockfantasy.com, hit the mock drafts tab. It's completely free. There are going to be constantly mock drafts running. All you have to do is join a lobby, and then you will be inserted as soon as that draft fills, and you can get some real practice for your actual Dynasty rookie drafts and Dynasty startup drafts this offseason, which I'm super excited to see where the ADP shakes out with Travis Hunter, because I don't know what to expect. You go ahead, you look at this profile, and on the prospects page, yes, we can't just say, oh, okay, he was next to guys like, I don't know, Jalen Waddle. He was next to somebody like John Ross. He was next to Garrett Wilson, because we all know that his offensive statistics are, of course, going to be watered down, where you go through and you see that he played 83% of the defensive snaps for his team in college. So if you're playing 83% of the defensive snaps, yeah, we're not expecting him to come out and be the best, most dominant wide receiver ever. Now, if you're looking at what this Jags coaching staff said right after the Travis Hunter selection, they said they are going to be playing him at wide receiver first and give him time to learn the defensive playbook. You combine this with the trade that they made to go get Travis Hunter, and if you're looking at the price that they paid, NFL organizations only really pay that kind of price to move up to either get quarterbacks or wide receivers. You never see those type of contracts, those types of trades in the NFL draft go towards corners. So for how I'm viewing things at the moment is I am viewing Travis Hunter more likely than not is a wider receiver, and he will play some on the defensive side of the ball in specific situations. Now, if you told me that Travis Hunter was playing 100% of the offensive snaps and no defense, I think you can make the argument to very easily have him over Hampton. Just with Hampton, where you have no red flags whatsoever, I'm going to be a little bit hesitant to put him behind Hunter, because with Hunter, obviously you do have some uncertainty with the amount that he is going to be playing. And if we go ahead and if we look at wide receivers to go inside the top 10 picks of the NFL draft, you've had Travis Hunter since the year 2016. Nobody's gone higher. Then Marvin Harrison, Corey Davis, Jamar Chase, Malik Neighbors, Jalen Waddle, Mike Williams, McMillan, Drake London, John Ross, Rome Odunze, Garrett Wilson, as well as Devonta Smith. Now, going over and looking at McMillan, he finds a relatively empty depth chart, right? Where Travis Hunter is going to have to go up against Brian Thomas Jr. McMillan, he has nobody. Yeah, you have to go up against Leggett. You have to go up against Jalen Coker. Right? Not real competition for a player that just absolutely dominated the other wide receivers at Arizona. Of course, you can look at him and say, oh, he had 1,300 receiving yards in 12 games played. That's great production. But to put this into context, he had 1,300 receiving yards in 12 games played, and the next highest leading receiver on this team was sitting at 323. So McMillan, absolutely dominant. We all know that. If you go over to the prospects page on the site and you actually filter out wide receivers that were round one picks that had more than 10 targets a game and more than 100 receiving yards a game as well, you have three names. You have McMillan, you have London, and Devonta Smith. So this is a wide receiver that now that he gets the top 10 NFL draft capital, he checks every single box. There's no reason to not think he can have a 25% team target share the second he gets to Carolina based off the limited competition on this NFL roster in comparison to other teams such as the Jacksonville Jaguars with Brian Thomas Jr. Now, of course, I will admit, I am not the biggest Bryce Young guy. I think if you look at Bryce Young in my Dynasty rankings, he's about QB 20. I think that this gives Bryce Young a legitimate shot to actually take that step forward in year 3, where I was very concerned about the supporting cast that he had before. And honestly, the gap between Lawrence and Young is one of the reasons why I am going to have Travis Hunter ahead of McMillan. But McMillan definitely in the same tier. Now, going over and looking at Cam Ward's going to be the 5th player in my rankings, and he's in his own tier. Like, unless you're playing in a 14-team Superflex League, which, of course, 14-team Superflex League, freaking take Cam Ward over McMillan. Take Cam Ward at the 102. I don't care. I understand quarterbacks are very hard to come by there. But in a 12-team Superflex League, I don't really see the justification based off how cheap other quarterbacks are, like Brock Purdy, Baker Mayfield, Trevor Lawrence, for you to go ahead and take Cam Ward over one of the receivers like McMillan, Hunter, that presumably can be a top 12 Dynasty option day 1, or somebody like Hampton, who I think you can make an argument he's like the RB5 in Dynasty day 1. So I'm going to have him in his own mini tier here. However, if you're playing in a 10-team Superflex League where quarterbacks are very easy to come by, I actually think you can move Cam Ward down a tier into the Judkins-Henderson range that we're going to talk about in just one second. With Ward going to a situation with the Tennessee Titans that it's difficult to say, oh my gosh, this is a Brock Purdy stepping into the Niners type situation, right? He's not going to a Niners level organization, but at the same time, I don't necessarily think we can view it as the same organizational situation that you have with like the Browns, Jets, where typically I am going to be putting a discount on a quarterback going to those teams, just given the historical significance of those organizations and how they affect players from the top down. But I think Titans, neutral scenario. You do have Calvin Ridley. They invest in some wide receivers. Day 3 of the NFL draft. If you're looking at the rushing upside, it's okay. It's not great. Like we go back 2 years ago, he had 8 rushing touchdowns. This past year, he has over 200 rushing yards at Miami. Of course, this is actually a little bit more because in college, they are counting sacks as negative rushing numbers. I'm not expecting him to be a Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson level rusher, but I do think you maybe get a little bit. Maybe this is like a Lawrence type situation. Now, going to 6 and 7, this is like the range that you need to get to. If you are playing in a super flex league, you need a top 7 pick. If you're playing in a 1 quarterback league where Cam Ward's not going to be there, I would say that you're going to need a top 6 selection. The second that we had Trevion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins getting drafted to the Patriots and the Browns respectively, I put Henderson at the 106 and I put Judkins at the 107 on our rankings on the site. Obviously, I'm updating the rankings on the site damn near every single day, especially at this point when there are so many moving pieces. I know that we had some pushback, people making an argument, well, Mason Judkins has a clearer path in Cleveland where you really don't have any competition in comparison to where Trevion Henderson is going to have to deal with Ramondre Stevenson. But now that you get Dylan Sampson headed over to Cleveland, I don't see the justification anymore for anybody to really put Judkins ahead of Henderson, especially if you were looking at the context of the situation in New England specifically. The New England Patriots should have a significantly improved offense from 2024 to 2025, both with the change of the coaching staff as well as getting Drake May a full year under center. So you're going to have a much improved offense. And if we look at the weapons, they bring in Kyle Williams, who we'll talk about in just one second. They bring in Stephon Diggs coming off a torn ACL. But ultimately, I'm not sitting here thinking that either one of these players is going to be able to assume just a ridiculous amount of targets. I don't think either guy is going to be able to get to a 25% team target share. So I would make the argument that this is an improved offense that has a ton of targets available. And if you look at Trevion Henderson with the receiving skill set that he showed in college, you go back to his true freshman season in 2021, this is a player that had 312 receiving yards. This is a player that had 27 receptions as a rookie at Ohio State. So I reasonably see in the range of outcomes here for Henderson, for him to come in and year one, give you an Alvin Kamara type rookie season. Now, of course, maybe the efficiency isn't the same level as what you had from Kamara in 2017. We know Kamara is a very special player, but I think Henderson could come in very easily, have 100 targets. I think Henderson could see 70 receptions in his rookie season. So for a full PPR format, he's the clear answer for me over Judkins. If you're looking at Judkins, I know a lot of people are maybe a little bit concerned with the efficiency marks, but if you go back to his time at Ole Miss, the dude had almost 1,600 rushing yards. The dude added on 132 receiving yards. So he had almost 1,700 yards from scrimmage as a true freshman in the SEC. Now, of course, the 5.5 yards per attempt for Judkins in comparison to the 7.1 for Henderson at Ohio State this past season. It doesn't look great, but at the same time, you have to look at how these running backs were utilized. Where Judkins was the between the tackles grinder, Henderson was used more in space. He kind of got the fun touches where you did have the more boring touches going over to Judkins. Judkins was a great athlete at the NFL Combine. He was super high pedigree recruit coming out, 120 rushing yards per game as a true freshman. And if you're just looking at these prospects in comparison to what we have seen since the year 2016, obviously you can do this over on the prospects page on the site. But I'm going to filter out, for the case of Henderson, running backs that were selected between pick 50 and pick 30 that had a RAS score over 8, so you're a good athlete at the NFL Combine, and over 25% of your touches led to first downs in your collegiate career. In the case of Trevion Henderson, the comps are Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon, Javonte Williams, Breece Hall, Trevion Henderson, Nick Chubb, Kenneth Walker, Derrick Henry, Quinshon Judkins, Sony Michel. So that listed 10 guys. You had 2 busts. You had Javonte and you had Sony Michel. Going over and looking at Judkins actually had a RAS score over 9. Judkins was an insane athlete. So if we put those same filters, but actually move the RAS filter up to 9 rather than 8, those running back comps are Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon, Breece Hall, Nick Chubb, Kenneth Walker. I think the Kenneth Walker comp for Judkins is probably the most applicable, to be completely honest. But both running backs are top 10 running backs in Dynasty for me day one. Both running backs, I think, have RB1 upside in their rookie seasons. And this is the range of drafts you absolutely have to get to. Now, going down to our next tier, if you're pick 8 here, again, I think plan A is you try to trade up a slot or 2. If you can't trade up a slot or 2, I think you're going to have to try to move back 3 or 4 spots because I don't think it's going to make too big of a difference. Now, how I'm breaking it down right now is Matthew Golden's my wide receiver 8. While the Packers have 15 different wide receivers on their roster, Matthew Golden may be the only guy that can actually be out there for every snap. He may be the wide receiver 1 day 1. Now, y'all know I am not a super big fan of Matthew Golden. I know that he won the NFL Combine, but again, if you look at the historical data, it's not like the NFL Combine matters too much for wide receivers. You just kind of need to hit minimum thresholds. And what matters a ton for wide receivers translating from college to the NFL for fantasy football purposes. I want to stress we are playing fantasy football. I'm not a real life NFL general manager. If I was, I'd be the worst general manager to ever walk the face of the planet. But if we're looking at what matters for fantasy purposes, you need to see collegiate production in college for it to come into the NFL. The only exceptions are when you are going up against top level competition at your own school. So if you're Jalen Waddle and you're having to play against Jerry Jeudy, you're having to go up against Henry Ruggs, you're having to go up against Devonta Smith, yeah, we're going to cut you some slack. If you're Igbuka and you're having to go up against Jackson Smith and Jigba, you're having to go up against Marvin Harris, you're having to go up against every 5-star recruit that goes to Ohio State. I'm going to cut you some slack when it comes to your overall receiving profile. In the case of Matthew Golden, I don't know if we can, because you go over and of course, hook 'em horns. Y'all know I'm a Texas fan. But the dude doesn't have 1,000 receiving yards through 16 games played at Texas. You look at his time at Houston, he never had a year where he broke 600 receiving yards. You look at his production in comparison to the other top receiving options at Texas. I mean, he had about 61 receiving yards per game in comparison to Gunnar Helm at 49, in comparison to Isaiah Bond at 39. I completely understand the argument. Well, Mason, come on, man. Look at what he did in the college football playoffs. Look at what he did at the end of the season. It took him a little bit of time to break out. It took him until Isaiah Bond got hurt to break out. And if we go through and look at the historical data, it's just not favorable. If we look at all round 1 picks that had fewer than 2.3 yards per route run through their entire NFL career and fewer than 25% of their routes leading to targets, you had N'Keal Harry, Brian Thomas, Laquan Treadwell, Henry Ruggs, Jahan Dotson, Matthew Golden, Zay Flowers, Xavier Legette, Ricky Pearsall. So you have some of the biggest busts that we have seen since 2016 from round 1, like Harry, Treadwell, Ruggs, Dotson, Legette, Pearsall. You have a guy low in wide receiver 2 is Zay Flowers. And then you have an elite alpha with Brian Thomas. But again, going back to where we were looking to cut some slack for wide receivers with their production profiles, it's when you had to go up against top competition. Brian Thomas had to go up against top 5 NFL drafted player in Malik Neighbors. I think that's top competition, and that's a much better excuse than you had to go up against Gunnar Helm and Isaiah Bond. So I don't like the production profile for Matthew Golden, but I think the landing spot's great. I think he could be the wide receiver day 1. Like Igbuka, I think has a much better production profile. I think that this is somebody that can actually come in and he profiles as a player that's going to demand targets and he's going to see volume. If we're going to go ahead and look at what he managed to do at Ohio State, again, against some of the toughest competition in the country, you go back to 2022, he had over 1,100 receiving yards as a true sophomore. 5-star recruit coming in. I mean, this past season, yes, he's not the wide receiver 1 on his own team, but you had Jeremiah Smith, a wide receiver that presumably will get drafted in the top 5 picks of his NFL draft class. And still, if you look at the advanced numbers, the production profile is just fine. If we're looking at wide receivers that were selected between picks 11 and 32, so you're a mid to late first round pick, just like Igbuka, and more than 10% of your routes led to first downs, and more than 25% of your routes, you actually drew a target. Those names are Jackson Smith and Jigba, which is his closest comp, Hollywood Brown, Rashad Bateman, Chris Olave, Jordan Addison. So the comps for Igbuka are a lot better for fantasy purposes than they are for Matthew Golden. The difficulty with this is you go to a team that has Mike Evans, you go to a team that has Chris Godwin. So his closest comp, like Jackson Smith-Njigba, is kind of a similar scenario where JSN had to go to a team that had DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, where obviously year one, that did severely limit him. I'm going to be worried about the same thing happening with Igbuka. So again, I'm going to put Golden ahead of him in my rankings on the site at the moment. This can be something that maybe we flip back and forth with this entire tier. So again, I know we keep referencing this, but flockfantasy.com is where all our rankings are, where all this prospect information is, where you can get into those practice mock drafts, both for rookie drafts and your dynasty startup. And I'll leave a link in the description and comment section for you. Now, going over to Colston Loveland, he does end up going as the first tight end off the board, which isn't a super big deal, right? It's pick 10 versus pick 14 draft capital with Loveland versus Warren. Loveland has a great production profile if we're looking at market share numbers. He has almost 50% of the receiving production on a per game basis for this Michigan offense. He had 58 receiving yards per game, where the next highest receiver was at 22. Tyler Warren, of course, had a more production overall, where he had 104 receptions this final season at Penn State, hit over 1,200 receiving yards. They just threw the ball way more. Like if you're looking at market share numbers, Warren was at 77 receiving yards per game, but the next highest was at 48. If we're looking at the situations that both these players are stepping into, I don't like either one. Like I think Chicago's offense is going to be really good this year with Caleb Williams taking a step into year two with all the weapons that he has with Ben Johnson coming over. But realistically, Loveland could be the fourth option in this passing offense. He could be behind DJ Moore. He could be behind Rome Odunze. He could be behind Luther Burden. We just simply don't know yet. And if we're going to go ahead and if we're going to look at Warren, the reason I don't know if you can be super excited about him is you're looking at an offense that is extremely limited when it comes specifically to the passing volume between Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. I mean, if you had different quarterback play here, where you didn't have to deal with maybe a bottom five offense when it comes to pure passing yards and passing touchdowns, I think you could talk me into Tyler Warren. The difficulty is going to be just getting there from a situational standpoint. So this is a big tier for me. If you're playing in a league that has a massive tight end premium format, I'm fine if you want to move the tight ends ahead of the wide receivers. But again, I think the main thing you want to do is if you're like pick 8, if you're at pick 9, I would just try to get to the running backs at 6 and 7. Now, going down to our next tier, we're going to be led off with Jackson Dart. Goes pick 25 to the New York Giants. And now the Giants get to have Russ, they get to have Jameis, and they get to have Dart. I think we can assume that Dart's probably the starting quarterback by the end of the year. He's going to be in a situation where you actually do have some talented names around you. You actually are looking at a pretty damn good receiving back with Scatterby, we'll talk about later on. And at the same time, obviously you have Malik Neighbors, which is the exciting thing here. If you're looking at Jackson Dart, his final season at Ole Miss, really nice counting numbers. Like he had almost 70% mark with his completion percentage. If you're looking at his adjusted yards per pass attempt, he was at 11.5, pretty much the highest mark in the country on 329 passing yards per game. Again, super difficult to evaluate these rookie quarterbacks coming in. I'm never really going to sit here and be able to tell you that I can do so confidently. But what I do want to look at is I want to look at the rushing upside, and the rushing upside's decent. And this is why I'm going to have him at the top of this tier, because you go back to Ole Miss in 2022, he had over 600 rushing yards. Now this final season, he had about 500. But again, if you take that sack negative yardage out of this, that would have gone up presumably to about 700 rushing yards for Dart through 13 games played. Am I expecting him to average 40, 50 rushing yards per game in the NFL? No, or he would be a lot higher on this list. Our next two guys are going to be RJ Harvey and Caleb Johnson. So Harvey's stepping in to a depth chart that is sitting with Audric Estime and Jaleel McLaughlin. Like he is the starting running back day one. Not only is he the starting running back day one, but you take him in the late first, the beginning of the second of your rookie draft, you could reasonably in deeper dynasty leagues put him in your lineup week one. You don't even have to see it beforehand. Now, if you're looking at the positives and the negatives, he played his first season in college back in 2020. So this is a 24-year-old running back. Once you get to his second contract, it's going to be difficult to find a team that's willing to pay him, right? Even if he has like a James Cook type 4-year stretch for his rookie deal. I don't necessarily know if any NFL team is going to be going out there and trying to give him a 3-year extension. But with that being said, I think that this is a player that can help you contend immediately. He did have 22 rushing touchdowns this past season. And if you look at his total touchdown mark, he had 25 touchdowns, and the next highest player in his offense had 4. So he was the entire offense. Is he a phenomenal receiver? Probably not, right? He had 267 receiving yards. He can probably get the job done there. But main thing is you're just getting immediate volume. You have the NFL draft capital. RAS score over 8 as well. If you're looking at picks 40 through 80 in the NFL draft with the RAS score over 8 and over 30% of their touches being first downs, running backs that are on the same list as Harvey, you have Taylor, Mixon, Kamara, Henry, Walker. All of those I would say are maybe a little bit of a stretch in my mind, but the running backs that maybe are a little bit better of comps here are Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, J.K. Dobbins, R.J. Harvey, James Cook. I think that's about the range that you are expecting, which again, if you're here sitting at the 201, you're able to get that player that's super exciting. I mean, if you're at the 202 and you can get Caleb Johnson, that's super exciting as well. And this is why I'm talking like, if you're at pick 8, I'm trying to trade up, I'm trying to trade down, I'm trying to do anything but have to sit there and select Matthew Golden. Caleb Johnson, I mean, very similar to what we were just talking about with Harvey. He had 22 receptions his final season at Iowa. He had 21 rushing touchdowns. If you're looking at him being everything in his offense, he had 23 total touchdowns. Comparison to the next best player was the quarterback with 4 rushing touchdowns. And then you had the other running back with 3 total touchdowns in the same offense. So you did just get absolute dominance here. Again, if you're looking at the situation in Pittsburgh, while I'm going to have Caleb Johnson below Harvey, is just given the fact that you are most likely having to compete with touches with Jaylen Warren. I would almost operate on the assumption that Jaylen Warren's going to maintain the same role that he had last year, that he had the year before that. And you almost have Caleb Johnson just being a Najee Harris with a little bit more juice, which is great if the offense is decent. But my main concern is going to be if Mason Rudolph is truly the starting quarterback and we don't get news of Aaron Rodgers signing anytime soon. I think maybe you should be a little bit concerned. Now, going to the bottom of this tier, we are going to have Jaden Higgins and Luther Burden. So obviously Burden, one of the biggest fallers from the NFL draft, both landing spot as well as maybe going behind some of these other guys. Like Jaden Higgins gets better draft capital. Higgins ends up going pick 34 to the Houston Texans. And I know a lot of people wanted to comp him to Nico Collins, but frankly, I don't really care because I think he's going to get snaps day one. You have Christian Kirk, you have Nico Collins, but I think Higgins can play on the other side of Nico. You go back and look at what happened at Iowa State. I mean, yes, he had to compete with Jalen Noel. They accumulated everything in this offense. So if you're looking at like the Higgins production in a vacuum, I may not necessarily love it unless you put the context that Jalen Noel is that 3rd round pick, which he ended up being. So again, how maybe you're willing to give the benefit of the doubt to those Washington receivers last year with somebody like Jalen McMillan. It's like, oh, okay, McMillan didn't have phenomenal production in college, but he had to go up against Romaduzzi. He had to go up against Jalen Polk. They both got NFL draft capital. Now that we have confirmation that Jalen Noel did get that draft capital, I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt to Higgins. Now, yards per route run, not great. He had fewer than 2.5. If we're looking at players that were selected between picks 20 and 50, had a first downs per route run between 10 and 12% and fewer than 2.5 yards per route run. The guys you're looking at are like Jaden Higgins, N'Keal Harry, Cortland Sutton, Deebo Samuel, Curtis Samuel, Calvin Ridley, Jaden Reed. Right? So it's not like I can show you this list of like all hits like we can with Amarian Hampton, like we can with, say, Tet McMillan, and I can go, hey, I know that these guys we can rank as immediate running back ones and wide receiver ones in Dynasty based off the historical data. Once you get to round 2 of rookie drafts, obviously there's going to be a wider range of outcomes. I can't sit here and tell you I know Jaden Higgins is working out for 100% fact. Can't tell you I know this dude's going to be a bum for 100% fact. I'm going over and looking at Luther Burden. Luther Burden wasn't even the wide receiver one in his own offense this year. He's sitting at 56 receiving yards per game, whereas there was another receiver on the roster that had 68. Luther Burden takes a significant step backwards from his sophomore to his junior season, falling from 93 receiving yards per game down to 56. And again, you look at where all this production came from, playing in the slot. I mean, he was seeing fewer than, I think on the site we saw he had a lower average depth of target than like 10 yards. So your hope with him, and you can actually maybe see this with the comp, your hope is he's Deebo Samuel. Worst case scenario is he's Zay Jones here. Worst case scenario, he's Curtis Samuel. But if he can come out and be Deebo, then cool. But the issue with it is he finds himself in a landing spot where he could be the fourth option in his offense. Maybe he's the third. He's not going to be the first. If he's the first, by all means, I'm having to take a massive L. But Rome Odunze, top 10 NFL draft pick. DJ Moore, I mean, historical alpha. And they take a tight end at pick 10. So Luther Burden, bad landing spot, questionable profile that had a wide range of outcomes anyway. Again, I'd rather have the running backs, and I'd probably rather have Higgins. So I think, again, has a much better situation and a similar profile. Now, going down to our next tier, this Milroe ranking's probably bad. I'm just going to get that out there. Milroe, more likely than not, if you look at the historical data for like a third-round drafted quarterback, he is not going to be anything. More likely than I wouldn't be surprised if he never started 5 games in his NFL career. But very similar to what we did with Jalen Hurts back in the day, is that we were all over Jalen Hurts in the 2020 class. Because I was sitting there going, yeah, he's a second-round pick, but look at the rushing upside. If this dude does get a chance to start, I know day one I can put him in my fantasy lineup. It almost say the same thing with Jalen Milroe. You have Sam Darnold on a 1-year deal. So if Darnold gets injured, if Darnold goes back to being the Sam Darnold we knew from the New York Jets and Milroe does get a chance at starting, again, I'll reiterate, y'all know I'm not a professional scout. I would never be able to claim that I'm going to be able to tell you what quarterback will hit, what quarterback won't. But I can look at a quarterback and say, oh, he had 20 rushing touchdowns his final season at Alabama. If a quarterback had 20 rushing touchdowns in 13 games, if this dude gets to start for the Seattle Seahawks at any point, he will be in my quarterback 2 spot and he will make a difference. Now, Kyle Williams will be in the same tier. Kyle Williams gets great landing spot. Again, much older prospect, and that is going to be a concern here. And one thing that if you are looking on the prospects page on the site, a lot of these stats, you can look at like the career numbers versus the best season numbers. What I've changed my process with, especially now that we just have so much more data on the site where I actually can do way more research, is y'all remember back in the day, I used to really negatively impact a player for like being a 24-year-old rookie or staying until he's 23, whatever it may be. And I would almost just discount that final season production. How I think we can get around that is I think you just look at full career numbers, right? So I can't just sit here and say, oh yeah, I know Kyle Williams had 1,200 receiving yards this final season at Washington State. He had 14 touchdowns. There's also the dude was in his 5th collegiate season. You're going up against a freshman corners. I'm sure you're going to have decent little production here. But if we look at his career numbers, and if we're looking at wide receivers between picks 50 and 70 that had between 8 to 10% of their career routes being first downs, between 1.9 and 2.3 yards per route run, the list isn't great. You have a lot of guys like Terrace Marshall. I mean, best case scenario here is like Jaden Reed. Now, I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt in these rankings because I know a lot of film guys. I know the guys over at Underdog absolutely loved him. At the same time, you get a great situation where very reasonably you could be almost an every down wide receiver year one with one of the better quarterbacks and one of the ascending quarterbacks in the NFL. And your main competition's a 32-year-old coming off a torn ACL. So great landing spot. I don't love the prospect profile, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Going over and looking at Trey Harris. Trey Harris put up the best final season yards per route run number that I've ever seen. Like I literally had to ask the guys at the FSC, like, hey, can we double check this? Did he really have 5.25 yards per route run? He did. It was off a smaller sample. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at his career numbers. We're just not going to look at this final season where he only played 8 games. But even looking at his career numbers, super efficient receiver and gets decent NFL draft capital as well. The concern that I would have here is I'm almost going to assume that Ladd McConkey is still earning the vast majority of targets. And we're going to assume, especially knowing that they go through and they take Hampton round 1, they sign Najee earlier this offseason based off what they did last year as well, that this should be a rush first offense. So I think that Trey Harris is an older wide receiver prospect that gets decent NFL draft capital and gets attached to a great quarterback, but he's probably the number 2 option in a low volume passing attack. Now, let's go ahead and let's look at the 4th round running backs. I simply don't know what to do here. Between Tootin and Scatabo, Tootin is the freak athlete, right? RAS score over 9, but the efficiency marks not great. Like he did have fewer than 30% of his career touches leading to first downs. And if we're looking at guys that were selected between like pick 75 and 135, that had a RAS score over 9 and had fewer than 30% of their career touches leading to first downs. You're looking at names like Darrington Evans, Justice Hill. You have no hits on Isaac Guerrero is the best guy on this list. And remember, Kalen Ballage had some hype way back in the day. So yes, he's an elite athlete. You go to a relatively empty depth chart where you have Travis Etienne and you also have Tank Bigsby, but it's not like this coaching staff has showed that they're willing to believe in really either running back. Going over to Scatabo, he does have to deal with Tyrone Tracy, but you have, in my mind, just a much better profile as a receiver. Like Tootin, a big issue is, I mean, his final season, he had like 18 receiving yards per game. In comparison to Scatabo, was at 46 receiving yards per game. Not only was he at 46 receiving yards per game, but at the same time, he had like 330 touches in 13 games played. So you have the size to be a true 3-down player, and you have the receiving skill set that we are looking for. But he's attached to probably a worse quarterback in a worse offense. Tracy can make this a committee for longer, where Travis Etienne's only on a 1-year deal. So I really don't know how to rank either one of these backs. They are going to be the day 3 guys that I'm most interested in, though. Now, Jack Bech coming in with our next ranking. I know he got a lot of hype late in the process. I know a lot of people are looking at him maybe as that underneath threat that's actually going to be able to command volume, which typically is something that I'm excited about. But again, if you go through and if you look at the long-term numbers, his career numbers are very poor. This final season at TCU, they were fine. I know if you go back to his time at, say, like LSU, yes, he's not going to be great with Brian Thomas. He's not going to be great with Malik Neighbors. I'm not faulting him there. But even as a junior at TCU, posts 146 receiving yards through 8 games played. So late career wide receiver breakout. Finds himself good capital and a good landing spot as well. I just typically am a little bit nervous about those profiles. And then we're going to throw the tight ends here at the very ends with Mason Taylor, Terrence Ferguson. A tight end is, in my opinion, other than quarterback, probably the hardest position to evaluate, because not only do you have to figure out how talented these guys truly are, but you have to figure out the scheme fit. Because if you're looking at a wide receiver, it's very easy to look at their production profile in college to their production profile in the NFL and try to project that out. These tight ends, like, you look at how they were used in college, it may not be the way that they are used in the NFL. So it is very difficult. Mason Taylor goes pick 42. Terrence Ferguson goes pick 46. So they should be in the plans of both offenses. With Mason Taylor, I know the FSE guys were selling me that he was a really good prospect. He was their 3rd tight end coming into the class regardless. But in the case of Ferguson, I'd probably prefer the landing spot. If you have a great read on either tight end, do not listen to me here. Just go with whatever you want. That's why we have them in the same tier. But all in all, the main thing that I would have to say is, if you're sitting at like pick 17 or beyond, I would try to get up to pick 16 or above. If you're sitting at picks 8 or 9, I would do everything I can to try to get to pick 7 or 6. That's going to be in a super flex league. If you are in a 1 quarterback format, Cam Ward is going to fall down to the Harvey, Caleb Johnson, Jaden Higgins, Luther Burden tier. Jackson Dart is going to fall down to the Tootin, Scatabo. He's going to be like right behind Terrence Ferguson. And then you would be considering Milroe as like a round 4 pick, and no other quarterbacks should get drafted in that 1 quarterback format. But of course, we'll have the 1 quarterback rankings on the site, Superflex rankings on the site, startup rankings on the site, everything that you need, plus that prospect page. And also, I want to remind you, completely free on flockfantasy.com. We have the mock drafts page that is officially open. You can go do the mock draft simulator. You can go ahead and hop in a public mock draft, whether you want to try to get in a Superflex rookie mock, whether you want to try to get in a Superflex startup mock. There should be mock drafts going 24/7 there. Just go join a public lobby whenever you want to get in. And I'll leave the link to the site both in the description and comment section. But again, I really do appreciate you and really hope we get to see you out with the next video.